Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to start with a point of personal privilege, if I may, because I think I've probably known the administrator longer than anybody on this panel for well over 20 years. I was Secretary of State when he was elected to the State Senate in 1996, if I remember correctly. And then, frankly, was one of many people that urged him to run for Attorney General in Oklahoma in 2009. He did that, and he won that campaign, and he did the job so well that nobody filed against him for re-election as either Republican or Democrat. So I can just assure my colleagues on the panel, you may have disagreements over budgets or policies or what have you, but you will find that the administrator is unfailingly professional, is unfailingly courteous, will look for ways to work with you, not against you, and will handle himself in an absolutely above-board and ethical manner. And he's got some pretty good people around him, too. I see his chief of staff back there. I've known Ryan for a lot of years, too. He worked for Senator Inhofe and was his chief of staff. So he's got a good team. He will do a tremendous, tremendous job. So it's a privilege to see you in this position, my friend. No, I'm not. Actually, everybody on this table knows I'm not kind, and I'll show you in a minute how unkind I can be. But testifying about his budget, and he made the point, I thought, very succinctly, it was a bad deal for the United States. It just simply was, with all due respect to my friends that have a different opinion. If it was a good deal, they would have put it in front of the United States Senate and actually turned it into law, rather than run the risk of having it overturned, which, again, President Obama chose to do that. And that was his choice, but when he had a successor with different views, that evaporated pretty rapidly. And I want to commend the President for making it crystal clear, as you did in your testimony, that he's ready to engage, ready to sit down, but we're going to have a deal that is better for the United States, the American people, than the one we had. So I know you've caught a lot of flack for it. I know you played a big role in it. I'm proud of the role you played, proud of the advice that you gave the President, and frankly, I'm very proud of how ably you've defended that decision when I've seen you on television and in print. You clearly know your stuff, as you always did as a legislator and as Attorney General in our home state. So very, very proud of you. Now, that's enough praise for a minute. I actually want to congratulate you on one other thing. I can assure you, you're going to be the first EPA administrator that's come before this committee in 8 years that actually gets more money than they ask for. You know, and that doesn't mean you'll get as much as you've had, but you'll do better than you've asked for. And look, my friend Mr. Joyce alluded to it, and my friend the chairman and I were upstairs a minute ago talking to Secretary Mattis about the defense budget, and we understand budget wars and budget games. And decision was made, appropriate in my view, to plus up defense, and a decision was made to take all of that out of non-defense. I think that wasn't an appropriate decision. You know, President Obama used to have a linkage of spending 1-to-1. Any increase in defense, we had to increase domestic. That's a false narrative. You know, I actually think defense has the priority, but there's no such relationship. It's just as false to do a one to, you know, every one we do, we're going to cut one. You look at each individual function and you try to make the right decision. Now, your job is to do exactly what you're doing. You work for the President of the United States. I would expect you to defend the budget of the President of the United States. I suspect your private counsel to the Office of Management Budget may have been a little bit different. I know some of your colleagues in the cabinet, and I can tell you they didn't agree with every decision, but when the decision's made, your job to go defend it. But the final decision rests here. It does rest. The Constitution's pretty clear, and I would never, advise you about the Constitution of the United States. You know better than I do. But in the end, we have the spending authority, so we will look at this, and it's important that we have the president's priorities. But at the end of the day, Congress will make the decision, and I think you're going to do better than you thought, than you asked for. So that might be a good thing. I will tell you, I am concerned. I'll give you 3 areas. My colleagues, we all have our particular areas of concern, but you'll find one of the great common themes on this subcommittee is a bipartisan cooperation on Native American affairs. So when I see the Indian Environmental General Assistance Program cut by $2.5 million, and I see state and tribal assistant grants cut by $678 million, and I see a $69 million cut in the pollution control grant program of the Clean Water Act, which has a section on tribal guidance. That worries me, and it worries me, and I want to ask you this in a serious way, because we've talked about burden sharing, and that's fine. I think that's appropriate, frankly, and I know that you will approach that seriously because I know who you are. But there's a big difference between states and localities that have taxing powers and Indian tribes that don't. They may or may not have revenue, but they cannot tax. We do not give them that power. So when you make these cuts, how will they make up those money, particularly given the biggest recipients tend to be the poorest tribes and in the most isolated land masses and areas with the most limited economic tools available, and with citizens that by any measure in terms of their economic opportunities, their educational opportunities, their employment prospects are at the very bottom of the heap as we measure those sorts of things.
Well, first, thank you for your kind comments. And I have known the Congressman for a number of years, and he is a friend. He is someone I've partnered with on many endeavors, and he too is serving the state of Oklahoma and this country in a very, very wonderful fashion, and I appreciate your leadership. And with respect to the issues that you've raised, I think it's particularly important with respect to rural communities across the country, in addition to tribal communities, as you've indicated, the tribal nations, Congressman, that we recognize the very important role that the EPA plays in water infrastructure, air attainment, facilitation around those, and also the technical assistance. And as we go through this budgeting process, I look forward to working with you and the chairman, the ranking member, to address those concerns.
Yeah, we will, and again, I know you'll be open to that. We've worked on Native American issues before in our home state, but I also remind you that this is, as one of my colleagues referred, these are treaty obligations. They're not generous grants. We've made certain commitments, so maintaining those commitments and advancing them, as this committee has, is something we're awful serious about. I'll ask you one last question because I've taken a lot of time, if I may. It's not a question I know a great deal about. I want to preface it's something that was brought up to me by constituents, actually in light of this hearing. But it's my understanding you're currently doing a review of glyphosate, which I understand it's a pesticide, herbicide sold as something called Roundup. And in the past, it's been, I think, had a label that it might have carcinogens in it. But I understand there's a new study that has not yet been released called the Agricultural Health Study. It's over at the Health and Human Services. But for some reason, it's been held for 2 years, and it comes to a very different conclusion. So I'm just curious, as you do your review, could you look into that, and could you see if that study is there, and just make sure that your people, as they make their determination, have access to that data?
I will, and I will say that I've had interagency discussions with Secretary Perdue at the Department of Agriculture, Secretary Pryson, as you mentioned, at HHS. It's important that we collaborate and work together around these issues, and we will do that and report back.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look forward to working with you.